The Midrash tells us that Shem had his eyes on Dinah apparently for quite a while. But the question was how to seduce her, how to get her out of the house of Yaakov. He sent some of the local girls out dancing to entice her to go see what was happening. Vatetze Dinah, and Dinah went out, and Shem kidnapped her and defiled her. The word quickly came back to the house of Yaakov, what had happened to his daughter. Yaakov initially didn't say a word. He wanted to wait till his sons came back from the fields. When his sons came back, they were very, very troubled. Cain lo ya'aseh, this sort of thing should not be done anywhere, surely not to a daughter of the house of Yaakov. And the question was what to do. B'mirma, with guile, the brothers waited for Hamor, the father of Shem, to come. Hamor came and he said as follows: my son very much wants to marry this young woman. Davka nafshi, his nefesh, is tremendously clinging to this person. He wants her. Please name your price, we'll pay it. With guile, the brothers said, the price is, we cannot marry anyone who doesn't have a bris milah. If you will get a bris milah, then you can marry our women. We can marry amongst you. Otherwise, we can't. And Shem and Hamor both agreed to this. They went to their people. They told them of the great financial opportunities. These people, the Bnei Yaakov, are wealthy. It's a tremendous boom. All we have to do to join with them is to get a bris milah. They were very convincing. The entire city engaged in a bris milah. On the third day, Shimon and Levi went out, took their swords in their hand, and slaughtered the city. They went searching after they murdered all of the Zachar, after they murdered all of the males. They went searching for Hamor and Shem. They found them, killed them, and were despoiled the city. Interestingly enough, when they were finished, the pasuk describes that they went back to the city. Bnei Yaakov bo al chalolim, the children of Yaakov went onto the corpses. Ve'avozu ha'ir, they despoiled the city. Ashetimu achosam, the city that defiled their sister. And the Surah is bothered by one significant diuk, and that is the city did not defile Dinah, Shem did. Yet the pasuk is saying that the Bnei Yaakov went back to the corpses of the city that defiled Dinah. And the Surah explains why the Torah says the city defiled Dinah. It says the Surah as follows: Kilule hayadavar zeh bilti nimas. If it weren't for the fact that this type of activity was no longer considered abhorrent, if it weren't for the fact that this type of idea of the Nasi, the leader of the people, taking a woman by force, if it weren't for the fact that that no longer was reprehensible, lo Shem osekain, Shem would not have done it. Amnam, however, since it had become long accustomed, since this was now accepted practice, Shem was able to do it. Therefore, the city is blamed, the city that was metameh, the city that defiled Dinah. And the problem with the Surah still is, I believe, rather obvious. And that is, what the Surah is telling us is that on some level, the entire city was responsible because it was no longer abhorrent to have a leader take a woman by force. Meaning to say, we had 100 people in a city, no one protested loudly enough, no one made enough noise, therefore it was socially acceptable, and therefore Shem felt he was able to do this. Had in fact somebody protested loud enough and hard enough, it would not have been socially acceptable, and Shem would not have done it. Therefore, the entire city is considered responsible. However, the problem is that it really doesn't answer the problem. And that is because at the end of the day, all you can tell me is that these people allowed Shem free will. Meaning, Shem is a person of free will as you and I are. He normally would have been kept in check by certain social pressures. He might have been kept in check by the fact that it wasn't acceptable. So granted, the people failed in their putting up social guards to prevent him from acting like a chaya, but at the end of the day, it was his decision and his decision alone to do this act. How is the city held accountable? How are they held responsible for it? And I'd like to deal with this evening and get a better understanding of this concept of responsibility and what human beings are held accountable for. And to do that, I'd like to share with you one observation. Most of the survivors who went through Auschwitz came from Hungary. And the reason for that is because the lifespan of a Jew in Auschwitz was very, very short. It happens to be that Hungarian Jewry was not taken until deep into 1944. And the reason was because Hungary was considered in the alliance of the Axis parties. It was considered on Germany's side, and therefore the Hungarian Jews, which were somewhat in a political quagmire, were not taken. However, once it became clear that Germany was going to lose the war, Germany overtook Hungary, and in fact the Hungarian Jews were deported. But amazingly, almost 500,000 Jews were deported in 56 days. The vast majority of them murdered instantly as soon as they got into Auschwitz. They were almost all killed within a few days. What's hard to believe is the efficiency of the Nazi war machine at that point in the game. It took them many, many years to perfect the killing machine, but at that stage in the game, they were quite efficient and quite skilled at it. And I want you to imagine for a minute the following. Imagine you have a fellow who works as a switch operator in the railroad. Keeping in mind the fact that by 1944, if you were paying attention, you knew exactly what was going on. Certainly, if you were working the railroads, you understood that these people were being taken in and no one came out. It was not a secret, and certainly not if you had a position of authority there. And again, imagine that you work for the Reichsbahn, the state railroad, and you're a simple switch operator. And your job is to make sure that the trains run efficiently as they should. And you recognize that you're a part of this mechanism of bringing 500,000 Jews in, of which none or very few are going to come out. The question is, what is your responsibility? And what do we say to you when you say the words, listen, I was doing my job, doing my duty, I did not kill a single Jew, and as a matter of fact, all I did was make sure that the trains ran on time. Well, I'd like to share with you one critical observation. Adolf Eichmann was a bureaucrat. I don't believe Adolf Eichmann killed a single Jew. As a matter of fact, reports tell that when he actually showed up in Treblinka, specifically when he showed up in Auschwitz, what he saw made him pale, made him vomit. He couldn't stand the sight of blood, and even though he despised Jews, even though he wished for their death more than maybe anything in the world, to actually witness a dead body was something that he couldn't handle. All Adolf Eichmann was a simple pencil pusher, a simple bureaucrat who was one of the most evil men who lived in that century. And with that comes a very important observation. And that is, you don't always have to kill a person with your own hands to be considered a participant or certainly an accomplice to murder. If you are just but a cog in the wheel, but that wheel is part of a despicable activity, then you are part of that wheel, you are held accountable, and you're responsible for the results. I think what this Sforno is telling us is a step well beyond that. Forget a Nazi who says the words, I was just a part of the scene. What the Sforno is telling us is, if you were a person out there in that city, you are considered responsible for what happened because you didn't erect the normal social boundaries. After the time of Noah, the B'nai Noah were Megudah B'arayas. They stopped being the way they had been before. They were now careful with who they were with. They were very guarded. And what the people of Shem did was allow things to revert to the way they were before. But it doesn't mean that they were a participant. It doesn't mean a single one of them defiled another woman. But it means by their silence, they allowed something to come about. And when you're approached by true evil, oftentimes your silence is considered a problem, an issue, a sin in and of itself. And I think what the Sforno is telling us is a tremendous yesod. And that is the city defiled Dina. Why? Because each person in that city were capable of making noise, were capable of changing the socially accepted behaviors. Each one of those people were responsible. Why? Had you screamed, had you made noise, Shem never would have done it. We human beings are social animals. We'll only do that which is accepted amongst our peers, accepted socially. And if in fact it was not socially acceptable, then Shechem never would have done that, because the city did not protest before, because they didn't make known their hold on things. Therefore it was now socially acceptable. Therefore Shechem did it. Therefore they are responsible on some level for what they did. Now make no mistake, Shimon and Levi did not kill them because of that. There were other reasons why that city was Chayiv Misa. Many reasons why. But the Pasuk says that they were the ones who defiled Dinah. And what the Sfon is telling us is that they all on some level are considered participants. Why? Because if you allowed it to happen, if you sat back while evil was happening, your shtika, your silence in that sense, makes you a participant, makes you part of the cog in the wheel, makes you considered on some level accountable for what happened. And in fact, it's considered that the whole city was involved in this. And I think that this concept has some very real relevance in our day and age, in our times. If you pay even a little bit of attention to what's being taught in the Palestinian territories, you'll find that they have a very different educational system than Western society. Textbooks run over the same subjects, but it's the examples and the accepted subject matter that's a tad different. It's not just an issue of how you teach math, as in, if I had 7 Jews, killed 4, how many do I have left? It's taught with a very, very specific purpose. The entire educational system is focused on indoctrination. And if you pay attention even to simple things like geography, you'll note that there are maps of the region. And the only thing missing on the maps of the region is something called Israel. And as a matter of fact, it's very interesting to note that on PA television, they have children who are involved in various game shows. And the game shows are very entertaining when they ask questions like, tell me, what are the port cities of Palestine? And the answer is Ashkelon. And the answers are Yaffo. The answers are every city in Israel. And when you ask the size of the Palestinian people's land, the answer is the entire land from Mediterranean Sea all the way across. And if you study what they're propagating, it's one simple thing. The state called Israel doesn't exist. Now you may say, okay, that's chauvinism, nationalism. You can't really fault the people for that. But when you pay attention to what passes for normalcy in their educational system, you'll find some very interesting things. Excuse me for sharing a joke. 2 Palestinian bubbies are sharing pictures of their grandchildren. One shows one to the other, another shows another, and one looks at the other wistfully and says, they blow up so young these days. But listen to what I'm saying, my friends. There is videos that were shown in the Senate, and there was a Senate hearing in 2003 at which Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton attended, in which the following videos were shown. The video clip basically is of a young woman who says as follows, how sweet is Shahada. Shahada means death for Allah. When I embrace your land. An 11-year-old girl is filmed saying these words, Shahada is very, very beautiful. Everyone yearns for Shahada. What could be better than going to paradise? At which point the interviewer asks, what is better? Peace, full rights for the Palestinian people, or Shahada? The 11-year-old girl answers Shahada. Now, what's very interesting to note is when Palestinian women are asked the following question, and I saw this video. The interviewer asked the mother, isn't it true that people are accusing Palestinian mothers of being cruel, as if to say they encourage their children to kill themselves? And this is the mother's response. We do not encourage our sons to die. We encourage them to shahada for the homeland, for Allah. We don't say to the mothers of shahids, who have come to comfort you, meaning when they come to the suicide mother's home, the boy just blew himself up. We haven't come to comfort you, we have come to bless you on the wedding of your son, on the shahada of your son. Congratulations to you on the shahada. For us, the morning is joyous. We give out drinks, we give out sweets. Praise to God, the morning is a joyous occasion. But my friends, we're not talking about one isolated crazy. We're talking about thousands of incidents. As a matter of fact, Palestinian Media Watch has as its job strictly that, to monitor what passes for regular prime time TV in the Palestinian territories. And if you watch, go on their website and you'll watch thousands of videos that are beyond belief. Regular people throughout the entire strata of their society who say such things that are beyond description. Every one of them saying things along the lines of martyrdom is a great thing, martyrdom is sweet, I can't wait for the maidens. One mother explaining her son's motivation to kill some Jews while he blows himself up. He would always dream of Shahada. It was his first and last goal in life. I told him, dear, we all want to be Shahids. He said, in this entire world, I can't think of anyone to marry. I want to marry the dark-eyed. That's what happens when you blow yourself up killing Jews. You get the maidens in the world to come. I want to marry the dark-eyed. I said, if these are your thoughts, I wish for him Shahada. These are mothers of Palestinian boys, girls, regular people who occupy these lands. What about the clerics? What about the teachers? What about the rebbeim for the people? We shouldn't forget that Allah praised him in blessing the blood of the martyr. He forgives him from the first gush of blood. And he sees his place in paradise. He is shielded from the great shock and marries 72 dark-eyed maidens. But this stuff is standard propaganda. Every day, twice a day, 10 times a day, they'll show films, they'll show teachings that stress this over and over in every imaginable form. You see, Hamas hides nothing. The Palestinian TV hides nothing. And what's astounding is that you don't read about this in the New York Times. You don't read about this in the standard Western media. But if you go on any of their websites, if you go on Hamas's website, you will hear this all the time, every single day. They hide nothing. They're being very clear and very obvious in what their intentions are. Let me share with you Palestinian camp. Your children go to day camp. Your children may go to summer camps. There are Palestinian camps. The summer camps programs are strictly indoctrination camps, training the little tzatzkelas how to kill, murder, how to destroy themselves, how to blow themselves up. And it's rather interesting to note, they even have little games, by the way, there's a little guessing game they have on their TV program. Here's one of the questions on the guessing game. You have to guess who the hero is. Here are the hints. His golden year was 1940, when his armies invaded Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, Holland, and Belgium, and he defeated France. By mid-1942, his country controlled the largest land in Europe. He refused to surrender and continued to fight for 2 more years. But his bitter end came in the spring of 1945 when he took his life. Who is he, boys and girls? If you guess right, you win 600 shekel. But you see, Adolf Hitler is a hero in that society. And again, we're not talking about something that a few radicals, a few extremists, and we're talking about the regular educational system, we're talking about the regular TV programming, and we're talking about what passes for culture in that society. Now, I have one very important observation to share with you. Let's imagine for a minute that you are a Palestinian growing up in this world, and you recognize that this stuff is absurd. It is very doubtful that God is going to welcome me into paradise for killing myself and certainly not for killing other people. And you get the message that this is really wrong. However, you also understand that what am I going to do? Listen, I don't buy into this stuff, but they're very powerful. And if I open my mouth, I will likely be killed. What are you to do? And what is your responsibility? And what happens if you shut your mouth? And I'd like to share with you a very important observation. If you are living in that world, and by your silence, you allow it to continue, you are on some level considered a conspirator with them. On some level, you are considered a participant in that, whether willing or unwilling. Your choices really are simple. You have to leave or you have to rebel. But you see, your silence under extreme cases of evil is not just okay. It's okay to be silent if nothing is going on. But when you're facing extraordinary evil, your silence is on some level considered participation, it's considered condoning it, it's considered giving it a vote of approval, and you are held accountable with it. And I think what the Sforno is teaching us is a tremendous, tremendous concept. These people in Shechem were held guilty by just their being there. Why? Because had they changed the culture, had they stood up and said this type of activity is not acceptable to us, that type of activity would not have been done. The reason why Shechem did what he did was because no one protested. No one stood up and said, we will not allow this type of evil to happen. And because of that, Shechem did what he did, and therefore each one of them are considered part of the city that defiled Dinah. So too, in the Nazi regime, if you sat back and allowed it to happen, surely if you were a switch operator, surely if you were an army officer, surely if you had a part of it, but even if you were a plain citizen and you didn't stand up to protest, that is an issue because you're considered part of that society, part of that group that spelled out the death of millions of people. And I think in our day and age, this concept has some very real relevance. And interestingly enough, I don't think the relevance of this concept ends with the Palestinians. When you open anything in what's considered normal media right now, it is obvious and clear that the Israeli aggressors are the problem in the Mideast. And it really pains my heart as a liberal person to see the atrocities that the Israelis are bringing forth on these poor, innocent children. After all, it was for years and years the only state in the region where an Arab had full rights. It was the only state in the region where an Arab could get an education. The only state in the region where an Arab could vote. But it's not the same. You see, he wasn't given the right to murder Jews. And it's very oppressive. And I, as a liberal, feel that it's not right. And when you read, and not just read, when you hear songs, folk songs, that do the real beautiful propaganda routine, and they'll show poor innocent Palestinians by barbed wire, albeit that barbed wire was put up because they created that scene, but in the media it's played up with such powerful emotions to make one thing clear and understandable, and that is the Israeli aggressor is at fault and the poor Palestinian is being abused. Well, I'd like to share with you one very simple concept. If you are a part of that mechanism, then you are guilty by association. Guilty by association, albeit you're not a Palestinian, albeit you may not be a killer yourself, but since 2000, there have been countless number of people that have been murdered because of this acceptability. We've just recently witnessed 6 Jews being killed in India. 196 people, amongst them 6 Jews, and specifically 2 people who became really a cause célèbre because they were shluchim, they were very, very righteous, good people, and very, very innocent people who were martyred. Now, that made the headlines, and that shook everyone's understanding, and that brought everyone's attention to be riveted to this idea. I would like to share with you that since the year 2000, there have not been 2, nor 6, nor even a dozen Jews who have been killed. There have been over 1,000 Jews who were killed since the Intifada, the second Intifada began. 1,000 Jews murdered in cold blood. We're not even counting the severe and serious casualties. 1,000 dead Jews, and somehow that's lost its sensationalism. Somehow it doesn't really make it either into the Western civilization's headlines or even into our focus. But the reality is that that is evil incarnate. And when you see a region that is embracing wickedness, when you see Western civilization welcoming that wickedness and putting them up as their heroes, what you're witnessing is a debacle. What you're witnessing is a corruption of morality that's hard to envision. If you and I were writing a Purim spiel, there is no way anyone would believe it. There is no way that anyone would believe that socially advanced, civilized people would embrace the Palestinians. These people are by all counts and all measures chayos ra'os. All you have to do is study the way they act, the way they behave, the way they kill each other in cold-blooded murder. When they get their hands on two Israelis, you may remember the films, when they broke in and got a hold of two Israelis, from limb to limb, they ripped them apart. Organs, human organs were being flung with blood-drenched hands. They ripped them apart, literally like a beast of prey. And yet, in the European Union, these are our brothers. It's the anger of the Arab street. Nebuch, they're oppressed. You have to recognize how bad it must be if good, fine people have to resort to that. And the absolute absurdity of it is that the minute these people would have any power, they would murder the media first and foremost. And it is insane the amount of gullibility of the media, and it is insane how much they are the pawn of the Palestinian, of the Arab world, and there's one single reason for it. The reason why Western civilization cannot come to grips with this is because this is a war of ideology. You see, the reason why Islam is so bent on destroying the Western world is because it's their belief system. They sincerely and really believe that Islam must be primary, must have dominance over the world. They sincerely believe that history must be reversed. The prominence which Western civilization now enjoys must be given back to the Muslims, and if that doesn't happen, it is a terrible embarrassment to God, and their greatest joy in life is to sacrifice their life for Allah so that they could have eternity. And that's something that they believe deeply in their core. But the problem is, if you're schooled in Western thought, it doesn't make sense, because that's religious. And religion is something I'm not comfortable with. I'm at the core of my essence an atheist. And if I'm not fully, totally an atheist, at least I'm fully accepting of the fact that if there's a God, it's not really relevant, and certainly not something I'm going to give my life for. And amazingly, with that world vision, I view everyone, including the Muslim world. And I look at them and I say, the words that they say, they don't really mean. When they just talk about destroying every Jew on the face of the planet, when you have the leader of Iran standing up there talking about the fact that he intends fully to rid the world of this plague called Zionism or Jews, we can't take him at face value, because anything he's saying from a Western civilization standpoint doesn't make sense. And it really doesn't, unless you come to grips to one simple issue, and that is that these people sincerely really believe what they're saying. They're sincerely, deeply religious, albeit in a very corrupt manner, but that's the force, that's the energy, that's where they're coming from, and that's foreign to Western thought. And amazingly, the entire Western civilization has bought into this and have become an accomplice to murder. If you'd like to know who's guilty of the murders in India, it is not only the Arab terrorists, it is the entire Western civilization that has supported them. And it is the entire news media that gives credence and power to their position, that shackles Israel from doing the one thing that they should do, which is just retribution and keeping the issue where it should be. And in fact, if you're a willing participant in this, whether you recognize the extent of your guilt or not, you're held accountable, you're held responsible, you're part of the problem. And it is rather difficult to imagine and envision that this is the state of affairs. We're looking at an upside-down world. If you would have told somebody 40 years ago this is what it's going to be like, there is no way in the world. The Arabs are primitives. They are the opposite of everything in Western culture. Look at the way they treat women. Look at the way they treat this thing called civil rights. Everything that Western civilization stands for is the antithesis of the Arab world. Yet Western world embraces them as the underdog, as the cause célèbre, brings them to the fore, and they've created this culture where Israel is the aggressor, and the result of it is what's now being spewed forth on the world. And the reality is that if you want to understand the guilt involved, it's not only the Palestinian mother who teaches her son the value of sacrificing his life. It's not only the Palestinian culture that encourages it, that brings this forth throughout its entity. It's the entire rest of the world that supports it and allows it to happen. And what you're witnessing is rishis incarnate. You're watching wickedness to an extent that's very hard to imagine and very hard to understand. And what the Sunnah is telling us is you don't have to murder with your hands to be considered a participant. And you can be an accomplice even just by allowing it to happen. If you're a witness to rishis, if your wickedness is something that's there and you don't protest, you don't put up a red flag, you don't stop it in whatever way you can, then you too are held accountable on some level. And these concepts, my friends, are a bit foreign to us as well, because the concept is not only on extreme wickedness. And I don't want you to misunderstand that this concept is limited to issues like the Holocaust or the murder of Jews. The issue applies a lot closer to home as well. And I'm going to say these words lahavdil, and I mean as a very, very real separation, but there is an application of this concept in our own world. The reality is that much of Western civilization stands for things that are the antithesis of Torah ideals. And you may feel a bit uncomfortable when you read about certain things in the paper, when you read about states accepting, accepting homosexual marriages. And you may feel in your heart of heart that this is abhorrent, this is absurd, this is the height of, how could this be? However, what you say is, I guess, what could we do? What are we to say? How could we say anything about this? And I want you to hear very well what I'm saying to you. If your answer is, I am a Jew in exile, I am a visitor in a foreign country, hence I have no power, and my issue is to keep a low profile, then you may well have an answer as to why you don't protest in the streets, and why you don't get up and scream against the heinousness of this. However, if you become very vocal about your issues, if when it comes to school tax issues, you become very loud, if you pretend that you own the streets of Brooklyn, then there better be a very good reason why when it comes to major issues, you're silent. And my friends, this inconsistency is not to be taken lightly. The only excuse why we don't get out there and protest everything that we see is in fact the fact that we are a Jew in exile. It's not our country. We're here on the good graces of this government, and we have to keep a very low profile. But that's the reason. Otherwise, there would be a tremendous claim against us. And why is it that the Christian right screams out loud and clear? Why is it that they're very vocal, yet we don't hear anything from the Jewish camp? The answer is because Das Torah is to remain very, very low-key. It's not a country, not a land. We don't speak out. But that must be throughout our entire conduct. And then you can't be inconsistent doing that for one thing and not doing it for another. And that means to say, if in fact you keep that profile for everything, then it's a fine excuse. If not, it begins to wax very, very difficult to understand. This concept of being silenced when evil is befalling is a very, very powerful concept. Again, what the Sforno is telling us is in a situation of Dina, had the rest of the population earlier on said something that would change the culture, and Shem never would have done it, therefore they're held accountable. Every person in some position of power in Nazi Germany, had he screamed out, whether he would have been effective or not, there was an obligation upon him to scream out, and if not, he's considered a willing accomplice on some level. The more powerful, the closer, the more guilty he is, the further away maybe the less guilty, but any person who didn't scream when evil was being carried out is considered on some level guilty. And when you're witnessing absolute heinous murder, when you hear people get up, person after person, describing how they can't wait to blow themselves up to kill a few Jews, you're witnessing absolute evil. And if a person is silent when they witness that, they're considered an accomplice. On some level they're guilty, on some level they carry the burden with that person. This concept is not a small one because it's difficult and almost foreign to our culture and very different than what we hear in the typical Western society. I want to just finish with one last observation. I was zocheh to speak for a good long time recently to Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld, and he was telling me some of his childhood. And he described what it was like growing up in Vienna when the Nazis came to power. And very shortly, once the Nazis came to power, it became clear that a Jew could not live there very long. And he, along with the rest of the Jews in Vienna, made it their business to get out. And he described how he boarded a train to leave Vienna, but this train was headed toward Luxembourg, but stopped in a German town along the way. Part of the deal was you had to exit the train and pass through German customs. This was in 1938. The war had not yet begun. However, the Nazis were in power since 1933, and it was a very, very heart-rendering situation. In any case, he describes that he got off the train with one suitcase, because that's all the Jew was allowed to take out of Vienna, and immediately the SS stopped every person there and demanded that they open up their suitcases. He was a boy of 15 years of age, and the SS man asked him to open the suitcase, and he points to a book and says, "What's that?" And Rabbi Schoenfeld, then 15 years of age, said, it's a siddur, prayer book. And the German said, "No, it's not. You're a liar. You're a traitor. That's spy material." Throws it in the trash. Then he points to Rabbi Schoenfeld's tefillin. "What's that?" "It's the thing I wear for prayer." "No, it's not. I'm going to hang you by them. You're lying. You're a spy. You're a thief. You're a danger to this society." He takes the tefillin and throws it in the trash. Rabbi Schoenfeld, again, was a young boy at the time. He was 15. He began crying. The Nazi took a stick, smashed him over the knees, and goes, "Wimp, what are you crying for, wimp? Get out of here with your life, and you're lucky." He got back on the train and didn't assume he'd ever see his tefillin again. And he waited as the rest of the people were ushered back on the train. The train began taking off and began traveling. A few hours later, another Nazi walks into the train, but this man was a conductor who was on the train. And he's going from booth to booth throughout the trains, and finally he gets to Rabbi Schoenfeld, who's again a 15-year-old boy, and he says to him, "You're the one. These are yours, aren't they?" And he's holding the bag of tefillin. Rabbi Schoenfeld describes he didn't know what was coming next, but he knew it wasn't going to be good. "Yeah, they're mine. I want to return them to you." Schoenfeld said, "What?" "I want to return them to you." "But why?" "Well, to be honest with you, I don't know what they are, but I saw that you wanted them. I saw that you began crying when they were taken from you, and I saw that that Nazi guard smashed you over the knees, and it really was unfair. It was improper. So I decided I want to bring them to you." So Rabbi Schoenfeld said, "How? I don't understand this. How did you do it?" "What do you mean how to do it? I waited till they went on a cigarette break. I reached into the garbage can, took them out, and I searched for you. I searched your whole train to find you. But weren't you afraid that you would be killed?" "Oh, I know I would be." "So why'd you do it?" And he said these words. He says, "There comes a time in each person's life that he has to sacrifice for another person. I couldn't stand by and watch you harmed like that." And my friends, that is a powerful concept, because intuitively a human being understands that there's right, there's wrong, but usually it's swept under the rug throughout the busyness and throughout everything else. And most of our life, we're not called upon to stand up and really demand of ourselves heroism and demand of ourselves really taking a stand. But the reality is, there are many, many times when a person witnesses something and it's a demand upon him to stand up. Clearly, if it's a situation of obvious wickedness, if it's a situation like a Nazi guard, if it's a situation like a Palestinian, it's obvious. But in our own lives, there are many, many situations. And one concept has to be understood. And that is the same complaint against a Nazi who was a participant, even if he wasn't willing, but he was an accomplice just by being there, is against any person who witnesses wickedness, witnesses riches, and doesn't take a stand. In the current situation, it's rather obvious that the Western world has failed miserably in this. But again, in our own world, it's important for us to see, to recognize where this happens and what we can do. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant us the wisdom and the standing to put this into practice.